There's so many different ways to interact with nature.
And I was closing my eyes listening to it, and I was just like, all I hear is birds.
You don't have to go to like technology to sort of stimulate. There's different ways to stimulate, to sort of like kind of detach from the screens and like the buzz and the doom scrolling.
But I'd like to, say that you're an innovator, trailblazer, but also more importantly, my sister. So I guess I know the struggles that you've had to develop this company, straight from the ground up, but I want to kind of get your thoughts on your initial ideas for Moja Collective and how it slowly even changed or evolved since your first initial thoughts.
Definitely. So in the beginning, Moja Collective actually was meant to really be sort of an Instagram page to show diverse experiences in nature, because at the time, I think with sort of brands, when they were sort of advertising experiences in the outdoors, it was kind of like one sort of look, one aesthetic, and sort of one way of accessing nature, something usually really extreme, like hiking Ben Nevis or something like that. So originally, I wanted to have like a page to just show what different community groups and different people are doing in nature, just to show that you don't have to do sort of Mount Kilimanjaro to say like you've accessed nature and you've done something in nature. But then it's slowly, actually by accident, people thought I was hosting walks. And I thought, you know what, why not actually try and start to do that? So I had sort of my first walk in January of last year, or 2024. And it was really just a group of people that I met through other community groups. And really the aim at that point was, let me just try and get people out of like London into nature spots that weren't too far away. A lot of people think Lake District or sort of the Peak Districts, places that are like hours and hours away. But I discovered the North Downs. It's been there for a while, but only like a few years ago, I sort of discovered it. And I thought, well, it's only like 40 minutes on the train from London. So I'm sure my friends and people that I've met, they would have the time to come out. And I think when I saw people's sort of excitement and they were really surprised that these spots existed that were really close to London, I thought, why not sort of do monthly walks? And it kind of just progressed from there, really, just using Instagram and sort of word of mouth. And then there was this one day I was kind of sort of feeling overwhelmed about sort of work and life, but I had sort of to host the walk, but then everyone else in the walk seemed like they were really overwhelmed. So I just thought, you know what, why not sort of pivot the sort of hike instead of just sort of walking and hiking as long as we were doing and we were talking. People felt as if they needed that moment to kind of settle and calm down. So I was like reading a book, and one thing it mentioned was that if you are feeling overwhelmed, one way to utilize nature is if you're on a walk, focus on one thing. It could be the leaves, it could be the sound of the wind, it could be the soil that you could see, it could be a plant that you maybe don't pluck it off like the thing that looks like it's thriving, but maybe on the floor that you can hold, what do you smell, etc. So this was in Surrey Hills for people who are curious. And so that walk, I just said, okay, the first 30 minutes, everyone just kind of focus on one thing that you're seeing, that you're feeling, maybe physically or sort of emotionally, that you're smelling, and let's just see how that goes on. And we're all walking, and then we weren't really talking, like 30 minutes kind of passed, 35 minutes kind of passed. And then we didn't sort of walk in silence the whole time, but it was quite nice because we were all based in London, where we were together in a community, but doesn't necessarily mean we have to like listen to music or even talk. We can just sort of appreciate nature, but sort of without talking to each other. And so we did that whole walk, and at the end I felt lighter, less anxious and worried about sort of the week ahead, and other people felt like that as well. And so that's when the walking group kind of pivoted from just like hikes and walks, but doing sort of mindfulness activities and showing people different ways to interact with nature in a way that it doesn't have to be too intense. It can be at a park and you can just walk and just stand somewhere, or sit somewhere. So it could be sort of like that. And so it kind of pivoted to the mindful space, and we do monthly walks. Sometimes we're talking the whole time. Sometimes we're doing meditation. We actually did a specific meditation walk. So we actually had a specialist come in, and for an hour we were in silence. We went to the top of this kind of hill, and we were like surrounded by cows and the breeze, but we just all sat there in silence. And it was just nice to have someone that's kind of like a professional in the space. So me sort of thinking, oh, this kind of worked for me, maybe this will work for other people. And we kind of do that really on like a month to month basis. And then we've had the North Downs, the Lake Districts Foundation be really keen to collaborate and work and sort of do that outside of just sort of London. We work with Epping Forest, for example. So we did something in Epping Forest, the North Downs in Kent, and then we did a hiking trip in the Lake District. And that was kind of more on like the hiking and bringing people who've never been to the Lake District before on a heavily subsidized trip. So yeah, that's kind of how like Moja Collective came to be, really. It was just by chance. It was never originally sort of a walking group or hiking group, but it's just continually just evolving into something that benefits the community. It's not really too sort of strict, but really trying to pivot a little bit more, leaning more into the wellness and sort of accessibility aspects. So we're going to the Peak District next week. We were able to partner with the YHA for that. So bringing community members who've never been to the Peak District before for another sort of heavily subsidized trip to just give people that access that perhaps would have never thought that they would be able to go to those spaces as well. So yeah, that's like a long-winded way of like the story, but yeah, really excited to see how it's growing.
And it's interesting hearing you talk about Moja Collective. I think one of the key tenets of your collective is the idea of community, right? Trying to make sure you can have safety, not only in a group, but also individually to speak your thoughts, your mind in the most relaxed way possible. Do you kind of see yourself going forward as a potential community leader, or do you think that term is potentially even more loaded than it may seem? Or do you think being a collective is more important than just having one person who can lead everything?
I think it depends on sort of the movement. I think with Moja Collective, yes, I sort of, if you're looking at it on paper, yes, I sort of lead it. But a lot of the things, it's almost, I guess, like a vessel in a way. So if I didn't bring up the fact, I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed, how are people feeling the walk, and sort of them sort of guiding me in a way to sort of feed whatever sort of the community wants. Wow. There are so many sort of community groups and founders, but I feel like a lot of founders might feel like we're just facilitating that opportunity rather than being like the face of the change, if that makes sense. So for myself, I kind of like to just be, these are the opportunities that exist. What other opportunities would you like to see? How can I support? And I'd say sort of more of that because especially now there's people within the community that are really into poetry and like herbalist stuff. So the group doesn't have to be strict to that. It can allow other people opportunities. If there's like a funding opportunity, I can sort of advocate and provide the opportunity. So I'll definitely say, yes, sort of a community lead, but I guess more of a facilitator, like this is the space, we can all access, anyone can get involved, and more like how can we help each other? Because I think there's so many nature groups and organizations and people that are doing things, but the fear is that it becomes a bit too siloed when we're all collectively doing something to improve accessibility in nature or just interact with nature. We had people previously that were talking about the stuff that they're doing in the tech space. It doesn't necessarily have to be like these people are the founders of that and that's the face, but more we're all doing these great things. How can we sort of interact together?
I guess that's the issue in itself, right? I guess we have templates of other, not community-based things, but other like company-based structures, whether it be in tech or, on the sports organizations. I feel, and you may disagree with me, but I feel like nature and community-based activities should have a completely different structure to that. And I feel like what you're doing as well, from what I can see from the outside looking in, is that you're doing a good job of including not only the people in your community, but trying to get people outside of communities to join other activities, whether it be Moja Collective hikes or flock together experience, for example. I see that you're always trying to find different experiences for other people. And I guess my question is how do you try to find the best experiences for not only yourself, but for others to enjoy in nature?
I don't know if like finding's the right word. I think one thing I quite like in sort of the nature outdoor community space, I think we just showcase opportunities that exist. So I think before it was kind of you're only advertising what you're doing, which is great. That there's no shame in that, but it's also good for people to see there's different ways to interact. So there's flock together. So those people that want to do bird watching, here's an opportunity to do so. There's Black Girls Hike. If you want to do hiking, there's just so many different, there's a trail running groups. There's so many different ways to interact with nature, and it's kind of more for community groups or collectives, whatever you sort of want to call it, showcasing also what other people are doing. Because I think even in terms of this industry, funding opportunities can be quite difficult. So seeing how there's such a large impact in so many different spaces that can really sort of help sort of uplift what other groups are doing as well. So I think, I don't know if someone comes to me and I say, oh, here's this group. It's kind of more, if I've I've been to quite a few flock togethers, enjoyed it. I might, if you like bird watching, I went. It's really good. I went to this event. It's really great. I talk about London National Park City as well. If you want to become a ranger or, sort of work with the group, I don't want to sort of gatekeep, just say these are the opportunities that exist and people who are really keen to work with other people that want to do stuff. So kind of more signposting than kind of finding, if that makes sense.
That makes perfect sense. One thing I've seen from the amount of preparation you do is the amount of research you do into each area you go into, whether it be risk assessments or even historical data of all the stuff that you want to talk about when you're on these hikes. One thing I'm interested to know is how much your perspective has changed in terms of how nature is consumed by others and how potentially regulations by the government or potentially policies that we can see in the future, how that can potentially affect not only Moja Collective, but just how we all consume nature as a whole. I wanted your thoughts on that.
Definitely. I think when you're sort of leading walks, obviously you can sort of go on a walk. That's sort of great. I'm currently training to be a lowland level leader. So sort of like the actual qualification to do walk leading. Shout out to Black Girls Hike and National Trust. And through that, I kind of learned the importance of storytelling and using that as a way to connect people to nature as well. So yes, it's obviously good to go on a walk, but I like to sort of learn about the historical context of what we're seeing. One thing, my community group, when we go on walks, are very curious on who sort of oversees the area. And I think it's actually really important to know. So for example, the North Downs in Kent, there's obviously elements where the National Trust sort of oversees, if that's like the right word. Nature or Natural England always makes up that word. The North Downs themselves, Kent Council. So people are quite curious to understand sort of the ownership as well. And I think sometimes when you're explaining stories, so for example, when we were sort of doing like the meditation walk where we were historically, it was in Kent. And it's, it's a village. And at the time, if you ever go, you can see there's a white crown that's massive. And people may or may not know, but in areas of Kent, it's chalkland, which basically means like chalk kind of land. And sort of telling people those things. And then also the safety element of it, where it's like, okay, Kent, a lot of the areas is chalkland. If it's raining, it's quite dangerous because it's extremely slippery. So just be mindful. So I wouldn't recommend going to the White Cliffs of Dover, for example, when it's a rainy day, because a lot of it is chalkland and they don't really have barriers off the cliffs. So it's great to go and explore, but maybe on a day that's sort of dry. So I think sort of that kind of knowledge is really important, but then also connects people. For me, I'm always very curious about the areas that I'm going to. And I think especially now with, sort of capitalism and privatization, I think there's kind of that fear of that happening within nature spaces, and sort of educating, especially sort of in the UK. Yes, there are sort of pockets of land that are owned by various people, but it's a little bit different here where it's actually that collective ownership and agreement to conserve the place that we're in, rather than we own X part of the Lake District, let's build flats. There's a reason why you don't see sort of flats that are being built in that area, because one is not sort of that concentrated person or company that owns majority of the area, so it's quite hard to do something like that. But everyone's sort of on the same page of protecting the land. And there's, farmers as well. It's not in their best interest to build flats, for example, in that area. So having sort of farmland as well, sort of that. So trying to really kind of contextualize it to today. Well, for example, like with privatization, with a lot of things, but how in nature that's not necessarily a horrible thing. And it can be used as kind of like I don't want to say a positive example of privatization, but, it's not sort of the doom and gloom. So I think, definitely what you're saying, the safety element's really important, the types of animals and things that people see. And for myself, I was doing sort of conservation projects in Epping Forest, and once I kind of learned a little bit more about the work that's being done behind the scenes for these, these nature spots, I sort of appreciated it a little bit more, and then sort of shared that knowledge as well. And then that's sort of led people to want to volunteer for that said, if it's like Epping Forest Heritage Trust, for example, or sort of local areas too. I had no idea that beavers existed in London until a couple of weeks ago, and that was just through talking to someone that works in, so I think it's called the Ealing Beaver Project. And so those conversations, that storytelling allows us to understand and connect a little bit more with nature, and then spread that word for hopefully sort of more awareness, because I had no idea. Maybe you guys knew beavers were in London. Had no idea myself. So yeah, hopefully, I don't know if that answered your question. Went on a tangent there, but yeah.
No, it makes sense. One thing I'm always curious about is the safety aspect as well from you. Like, how important is safety to you, especially in groups when you're doing these hikes?
Definitely. I think with the rise of sort of talking about hiking groups specifically, I think it's fantastic, but I think also safety is really important. I'm not saying you have to be the most qualified person, but I think if you're hosting a walk or a hike and you've never been to the area before, that could not maybe perhaps be the safest thing if you don't know what's going to, that might arise, especially with the wind, for example. It might seem like when you went there, the first time it might have been great with wind and weak trees. There could be those dangers as well. So, but if you've not been there, it's a bit hard. So I think for myself, safety is really important for myself with the walks. I send out like risk assessments and things like that. Mainly also as well, I think there's sometimes a little bit of sort of anxiety or worry in the nature spaces. So for example, I'm learning that people would like to know how muddy it is, or if some people are fearful of heights and all those things. So educating or telling people beforehand, yes, you're going to see sort of wild animals, instead of sort of appearing and then seeing wild animals. Just that sort of allows people to feel a little bit more settled and comfortable. And it just allows people also the opportunity, if they see, okay, there's going to be dogs, like, you can't assume that no one's going to be fearful of dogs. So just kind of also sharing those things as well. So safety is really important, but I also want to try and use it in a way for people to feel comfortable and kind of know potentially what they're walking through. With weather can change, things can change. But I don't want like people really surprised as cows. If I sort of went there before and I saw cows and I didn't mention it before. But cows are for the most part harmless, but it's especially when we did our meditation, people had their eyes closed open and then there was a cow not too far. So at least if people were, they were aware there were going to be cows. I was surprised they wanted to join us on a hill that particular day, but they wanted to, I guess, meditate with us. So at least people have that kind of awareness and sort of that, because I think if someone's fearful, then the animals can sense that, and it's not very good. Yeah.
Going back to the idea of well-being, I'm sure you've talked to a lot of the people that you've gone on your hikes with, who have gone on the hikes with you. Have you had any stories from people talking to you about how being in nature has changed their well-being, or how the experiences of the hikes have changed their well-being as a whole?
Definitely. I think we did our meditation workshop last month, and I think people were quite intrigued to know the various different ways to be in nature. So for example, there was one point where the meditation lead said, if you're feeling overwhelmed, what you could do is kind of like put your fingers out and do almost like a mental, use your sort of eyes as a focus, as a lens to capture what you're seeing. Also, it's a way to train your eyes because we're glued to our phones and the screens are very close, but sort of looking at the distance and doing that. And people quite enjoyed doing that as well. It wasn't as windy as it is now, but it was kind of windy. So it's kind of like a white noise, calm wind. And the meditation sort of lead told us how to kind of use the wind to control our breath. So when it's doing like sort of a gush, really sort of, there wasn't anything like in the air that we would inhale and be like sort of problematic, but sort of really sort of inhale the wind, sort of hold it. And when it kind of breezes back, kind of let go. And I remember people after the walk, they never thought about using wind as a way to help control our breath and calm ourselves down. I didn't myself. So that was like really great. But I think for me, it's mainly at the end of a walk, if someone said, I really needed that. That's when I kind of know it's a gauge. They don't have to go too in depth to why, but I think that meditation, well, even I felt lighter. And I think a lot of people were surprised we could be silent for an hour. I can, because I like to go on walks sort of alone in silence, so I can do hours. But, that's a long time if you're someone that doesn't sort of sit and sort of be comfortable in silence, if that makes sense. So people didn't realize, I can sort of do that. And I don't necessarily, if I need to calm down, it doesn't necessarily mean I need technology or something to stimulate me. I can literally go outside on a walk, sit at a park, sit in a room, just, you don't, I think that's what the meditation leader was trying to tell us. You don't have to go to like technology to sort of stimulate. There's different ways to stimulate, to sort of like kind of detach from the screens and like the buzz and the doom scrolling. You can just literally use wind, and it's free. A lot of these things are free to do and are accessible. It's windy today, so maybe not because it's a bit too strong, but you know, all those sorts of things.
It's interesting you say, I mean, obviously we basically grew up together and we have two very different ideas of how to disconnect. Mine is very much like to do with like media, art, essentially staring at a screen, but yours is, you know, going outside, enjoying nature.
Yeah.
I guess obviously I think it'd be best for everyone if people had more of your perspective of going out there, enjoying nature and stuff. So how do you think you can essentially capture people like me, for example, who kind of enjoy that, the communal sense of like, you know, watching TV, being stuck to the screens? How do you get more people to get away from that experience and go outside and actually experience nature and appreciate the environment around you?
Yeah, I don't want to ever say there's like a right or wrong way. If someone wants to go on their screen, they can do that. If someone wants to go outside, they can do that. There's some days where I like watch Real Housewives, and sometimes just watching people argue distracts me. And then I'm like, okay, my life maybe is not like, yeah, it's not that messy. So, so it's just like, there's different ways to do it. I think for myself, I really try to, because my job is very on a screen, I try to like, the weekends make it be the complete opposite.
Right.
Whereas I think for yourself, it's quite so creative. You're going out to meet people in person and stuff like that. Mine's just like remote, everything's remote. So I think that's what's pushed me more to go outside. But yeah, I don't think there's a right or wrong way in terms of like trying to get people. I'm not one to try and like convince people to do things. It's kind of, here's something, you know, if you want to try it out, you can come and try it out. If you don't want to, that's completely fine, because I think it's about finding what works for you. There's some people who might want to go outside and also listen to a podcast. That's completely fine. Like I never want to tell people there's a right or wrong way, but definitely if you are in need of that sort of well-being walks and stuff like that, definitely sort of come join, but doesn't necessarily mean after I think an hour's silence is it might be a bit intense. So finding sort of different ways that work for you. So yeah, I think how you sort of consume media, that's not necessarily a bad thing.
True.
People listen to music. Some people listen to white noise.
But people say when you're in nature and you listen to music, that's like a cop-out. You should be listening to the environment to actually be involved.
Yeah, I'm definitely not like if you're outside in nature and you're listening to music, I personally don't, but if people want to do that, for me it's the blasting the speakers. That is like annoying. Like if I'm on a walk and I'm quiet and then there's like people who are enjoying nature, which is fine, but then they have like the blasting music. I remember I was walking, and then, do you know that like Central C songs like We Can Go Band for Band, We Can Go, and I was just like, why am I like listening to that in a forest? And I had and what was weird, I couldn't tell where that sound was from. So it's a bit like Central C, and I don't know, just it didn't work. So that's my thing. If you want to listen to music, but my like pet peeve is the blasting the speakers louder. It's just like, I don't really get it.
No, I mean, that's, for me, that's crossing the line. I think if you're in nature, you should either put music on for yourself to listen. Also, it's like sometimes I see groups, like large groups going to nature, and then when they're playing music, it's like double.
Yeah, that's what it is. Like when it's like 100 people, and then there's like 3 different cohorts all blasting music. And I think that's like another thing where it's like, it's great that we all want to access, but almost sometimes with like the sizing, like if it's like 500 people, it teeters on like the taking up space. I'm not an ecologist, but I'm sure 100+ humans in one concentrated area might spook the wildlife. I don't know, how do you ensure like litter's not being left behind, and the noise pollution element of it, quite conscious of safety as well. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but I always wonder.
I think it's a give and take.
It's a give and take.
It's good to have people out, but we have to also we have to acknowledge the effect that we have on the area.
Yeah. So that's like my thing, sort of taking up space, but it teeters to like to the negative. But that's a conversation for another day. But I
mean, I guess that's why Moja Collective isn't like 200, 300 members going out into nature. I think that you're very calculated in the amount of people that you have. Not only is it a matter of obviously ecology and understanding the environment that you're in, but it's also a safety aspect for you as well, because you're the leader of all these people. If you have 200 people, you can literally have a 99% success rate, but it's that one person that trips on a rock or gets lost. Or exactly. And also you could be at the front, they're all the way at the back, something happens, you're liable, or, you know, they could just disturb nature, and that's not really a good thing, is it? So
Yeah. So for context, the max is usually around 20. I'm an introvert at heart, so like when I would go to like those ones with like 100 plus, my social battery just was like, I can't. So for me, I do sort of 20. One, because I think sometimes when you have a big group, there's nothing wrong with it, but in terms of like that connection, it can be a little bit hard. It almost becomes a bit cliquey in a sense. But when it's like that kind of like 20 people, like for example, there were people that joined the walk that had no idea they worked at the same hospital together, and now they hang out, you know, for lunch breaks or sort of whatever. And I think if there was like 100 people, then to finding each other probably would have taken a bit longer or been sort of impossible. But there's pros and cons. I'm just an introvert, so I prefer 20. My social battery will just really deplete after like 5 minutes if it's more than that. So yeah, it's a good point in the safe, and that's sort of linking to the safety element. I know there's groups that they have, if it's like 100, they have like people throughout, so not one for 100. But yeah, I want to be able to say I've talked to everyone, and they sort of, and I think I wouldn't be able to do that in more than 20. So yeah.
It's funny, I was thinking of a story that I had when I was younger. I don't know if you were there, but I think this sums up our differences. I think you appreciate like the sounds of nature and stuff, but it was in UWC, and we were walking like in the forest, and then the teacher was like, okay, everyone, can we just get around this area? We're gonna, you know, she was Australian, but should I do an Australian accent? No, Australian accent. But she was standing there, and she was like, okay, everyone, if you just close your eyes and just listen to the wind and the sounds around you, you weren't only able to be hearing like the sounds of the animals, but you hear the music and the beauty of the forest. And I was closing my eyes listening to it, and I was just like, all I hear is birds. All I hear is, it just didn't make any sense to me. But I think the idea that you were hearing like the breathing of the wind and stuff, I wish I could appreciate nature in the same way you do. It's really, I don't know, I think it's beautiful. And I think I'm glad that you're spreading that idea to not only the people that follow you, but also, you know, all the people that want to listen, and I think it's really inspiring. All right, last question I want to ask you, but I guess where do you see Moja Collective potentially expanding?
Great question. I'm not too sure myself. I think that's another thing with like a lot of the community groups. I'm sort of in search of people who are doing kind of similar things. How do you ensure that kind of longevity without kind of burnout? So I don't think for myself, the amount that I'm putting in now would sustain itself over like another 5 years or 10 years or whatever. But how do you sort of have it where you can also pass on the torch? I don't think at some point there's only going to be so much I can do with the ideas that I have, where I would really, that's why I sort of lean to the community to have different ideas and viewpoints. Oh, I want to do this. Like, what are your thoughts? Because I know I don't want it to be one singular view. So yeah, so I don't know, but I think I'm kind of in the process now of like seeing what other people are doing and sort of picking their brains on how do you ensure that longevity, that community, but then knowing, okay, this is when it's good to kind of pass it on to someone else to do things. There's a group called Young Wilders, and they kind of have that approach. I don't think it was a choice, but because of like the funding pot, you can't be over 30. So for them, they know, okay, once I reach 30, I can't be involved. So they have to pass the torch on. It's Young Wilders. So if you're like, I know that it's in the hints in the name, but I thought that's quite interesting. And that kind of brought that idea into my mind of, because I think at that point, you probably would have done it for like 10-ish years. It's probably good to like pass it on. So yeah, I'm not too sure. I didn't think it would be where it is now. And it's only been, it's nearly 2 years now. So yeah, who knows?